Hello everyone, this is Vernon Martin from your Introduction to Critical Thinking course. And in this video, I want to address the question, what do we mean by valid? What does the word valid mean? It's really easy when you're going through and trying to diagram arguments to determine whether an argument is valid or invalid, to get lost in the mechanical details, to get lost in the steps that you need to do in order to evaluate an argument's validity. But really what we should be thinking about is what the term valid really stands for and why it's really crucial to understand as an essential part to deductive arguments. Remember that arguments are explicit ways to formulate reasons for why something is the case, for why something is true. And when we're talking about that something, we're really talking about whatever is claimed to be true in the conclusion. So arguments are explicit ways to formulate reasons, and that refers to the premises, for why a conclusion is true. When we say an argument is valid, first off, we're referring to a specific type of argument, a deductive argument. And that we're saying by an argument being valid is that that form of the deductive argument is such that if the premises are true, that means all the premises true. So in this case we have two premises. Both would be true. If this whole argument is valid, we're saying that if premise 1 and premise 2 are true, the conclusion must also be true. That is, there's no way for the premises to be true and the conclusion false at the same time. That is a function of the argument's form. That's why we're able to replace all the specific terms in a deductive argument and symbolize them either by a letter or some other symbol, and evaluate that argument because it's not about the content. The issue of validity has to do with form. Now notice what we're also saying here. We're not saying that the premises are actually true, that they're factually true. We're saying that a valid argument is valid precisely because it has the form such that if the premises are all true, the conclusion must also be true. The truth of the premises force, by virtue of logic, by way of logic, they force the truth of the conclusion. So in the next slide, I want to look at a particular example that will hopefully drive this point home. So here's our argument. Premise 1, all dogs are mammals. Premise 2, all terriers are mammals. Terriers is a breed of dog. And our conclusion is, therefore, all terriers are dogs. So let's move this down over here a second. It happens to be the case that all dogs are mammals. So that premise is true. It happens also to be the case that all terriers, the breed of dog, are mammals. And it happens to be the case that all terriers are dogs, given that a terrier is a breed of dog. So we might be tempted to think that because we have all true premises and a true conclusion, that this argument is valid. But we'd be wrong in thinking that. We'd be wrong in thinking that because the premises are actually true and the conclusion is actually true, is what it means for a deductive argument to be valid. Additionally, thinking that validity has to do with a conclusion being factually true misunderstands something crucially important to understanding what arguments do. Remember, arguments are explicit ways to give reasons for why a conclusion is true. That is, the truth of the conclusion of an argument should be true because of the reasons given, in the premises. In our example here, we stated that the conclusion is actually true, but its truth value its truth value here is actually based on a set of reasons, some set of facts about the animal physiology or biology. That is, all terriers are dogs. Just that claim by itself gets to be a fact, gets to be true from some other set of reasons. Some other set of reasons somewhere. So even things we call facts are really at a fundamental level conclusions of arguments, conclusions that are supported by some reasons. And here we've got an argument that's giving a particular couple of reasons for why this conclusion here ought to be accepted as true. When we're talking about a valid deductive argument, we're talking about a style of reasoning, this whole inferential process, a type of argument that attempts to establish the truth of the conclusion that is based on the premises, based on the reasons given in the premises. And the form of a valid deductive argument is such that if the premises are true, that is, assuming that they're true, then the conclusion must also be true. And be true not actually or factually, but be precisely true because of the reasons given in these premises. So, while it might be the case that all terriers are dogs, it's not the case that all terriers are dogs for these reasons given in this argument. That's what it means for this argument to not be valid. A valid argument would be such that if this conclusion is true, it's true for the reasons given in the premises. So when we diagram categorical arguments using the Venn diagram method, what we're doing in our evaluation is answering the question, is this conclusion true because of these premises? The issue of validity is whether the conclusion follows from the premises by virtue of logical inference. Notice then that validity is not about the actual or factual truth of the conclusion. We diagram the argument and then ask, is the conclusion true in the same way that it would be if we diagram the conclusion? The Venn diagram works according to the idea that when you diagram the premises as true, you're again asking, is the conclusion necessarily true because of the premises? So, if this were a valid deductive argument, categorical argument, we would see that all terriers are dogs is represented in the diagram. And since it's possible, this ends up being actually the S category and dogs is our P category. If this were a valid argument, this region here would be shaded in, forcing all S's to exist in this unshaded region. So just as with the factually true conclusion of that previous argument, that all terriers are dogs, is irrelevant to the issue of validity, so too with this conclusion of this argument. The fact that the conclusion here that some penguins are old TV shows is false is not what makes this argument either valid or invalid. What makes this argument valid or invalid depends on whether the premises give good reasons, that is, logical reasons for the conclusion to be true. The logical inference from premises to conclusion, if that doesn't hold, if it, that is, doesn't give us good reasons, it doesn't contain that chain of logic between relevant categories, and it doesn't force the conclusion to be true, then that's what makes an argument, a deductive argument, invalid. So in these two cases, the fact that it's actually factually false that some penguins are old TV shows, and it's factually true that all terriers are dogs, is completely irrelevant to the issue of validity. The issue of validity is solely concerned about whether the conclusion is true because of the reasons given in the premises. So that's why we use the Venn diagram method. It's because the Venn diagram visually represents the logical structure or the form of the inference of the argument. It visually shows whether the conclusion is true based on the given premises. So it's a good method for evaluating the validity of categorical deductive arguments. Okay, I hope that explains a little bit more clearly what we mean by validity, and validity in specific relation to categorical arguments.